The wind howled across the Yorkshire moors as Daniel Harrington stepped down from the carriage. The road behind him was nothing but a thin ribbon of mud, winding back towards the nearest village miles away. Before him, half hidden in the drifting mist, stood the silhouette of Blackthorn Abbey. Its towers rose like dark fingers against the fading light, and its windows gleamed faintly as if watching his every move. Daniel clutched the leather satchel that held his notebooks and letters from his professor at Cambridge. His task was simple in words but daunting in truth: to catalogue the surviving manuscripts stored in the Abbey's long-forgotten library. Yet, as he gazed upon the ancient stone walls, he felt as though he were stepping not into history, but into a waiting mouth eager to swallow him whole. The heavy oak doors creaked open as he approached, revealing a tall figure holding a lantern. The man's face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed beneath a hood of grey hair. "You must be Harrington," the figure said in a voice that echoed strangely against the walls. "I am the keeper. You will follow me, and you will not stray from the marked corridors." Daniel nodded, though the words unsettled him. Inside, the air was colder still, carrying the scent of damp stone and burnt tallow. The corridors stretched endlessly, lined with worn tapestries depicting saints whose faces had been rubbed into obscurity. At last, the keeper led him to a narrow chamber with a single bed and a desk. A candle was already lit. "You begin your work at dawn," the keeper said. "Until then, you stay here. No wandering. The Abbey does not forgive trespassers." Daniel attempted to ask what he meant, but the door closed before he could utter a word. Alone in the dim glow, he unpacked his satchel and laid his journal on the desk. The silence pressed upon him, broken only by the distant drip of water from the unseen stone above. And then, faint but undeniable, he heard it. A low murmur, like chanting, drifting through the walls. Words in a tongue he recognized from his studies, Latin prayers. But the chapel, he had been told, was sealed long ago. His candle flickered. The chant grew louder. Someone, or something, was praying in the heart of Blackthorn Abbey. Daniel woke before dawn, his sleep restless and broken by fragments of whispers in the dark. He told himself it must have been the wind or the creak of ancient timbers, yet the memory of the Latin chant lingered in his ears. The Abbey at daybreak seemed little warmer than at night. He dressed quickly and made his way towards the library, guided by the directions the keeper had given him. Along the way, he passed tall windows of stained glass. The colors had faded, the saints depicted upon them cracked and scarred. One pane in particular drew his eye. It showed a figure cloaked in black, a face hidden, unlike any holy figure he had ever studied. The library was vast, though in decay. Dust coated every surface, and the smell of mold clung to the air. Piles of manuscripts lay bound in cracked leather, their pages curling at the edges. Daniel's excitement momentarily returned as he began cataloguing, his pen scratching eagerly across the paper. Yet, as hours passed, he felt the weight of the Abbey pressing closer. Now and then, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly through the halls, measured, deliberate, and never drawing near. Whenever he looked up, there was nothing but shadows. By afternoon, Daniel could bear his curiosity no longer. He left the library, tracing his way back along the corridor until he found a narrow staircase spiraling downwards. At the foot of the stairs, a heavy iron gate barred the way. Beyond it, a tall door stood, carved with crosses and faded Latin inscriptions. It could only be the chapel. The gate was chained, but as Daniel touched it, he realized the lock was already broken. With the faintest push, the chain slipped free, and the gate swung open with a moan of rusted metal. A blast of icy air rushed from the darkness below, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of incense, though no service had been held here for centuries. Daniel hesitated, his lantern trembling in his hand. Then he heard it again. The chanting, low and steady, rising from the chapel beneath the Abbey. Someone was down there. Waiting. The stone steps groaned beneath Daniel's weight as he descended into the darkness. The lantern threw thin circles of light, casting shadows that twisted and shifted along the walls. The air grew colder with each step, so cold that his breath misted before him. At last, he reached the chapel door. Its wood was blackened with age, carved with Latin words he could only partly translate, phrases of warning and prayer. He laid his hand against the surface, and for a moment he thought it pulsed faintly beneath his palm, as if something within were alive. The chanting had stopped. Daniel hesitated, then pushed. The door opened with a deep groan, revealing a vast chamber swallowed in shadow. Rows of pews lay broken and collapsed, while the altar stood cracked and shrouded in dust. Yet the faint glow of candles flickered upon the far wall. He stepped inside. His boots crunched on fallen plaster. The air was thick with incense and something else, something sour and metallic. As he approached the altar, he saw that the stone floor was marked with strange symbols, carved deep into the rock. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the shadows. "You should not be here." Daniel spun, lantern raised. At the far end of the chapel, half hidden behind the wreckage of pews, stood the keeper. His eyes glimmered like embers, his expression unreadable. "I heard chanting," Daniel said, his voice unsteady. "There is someone else in this chapel." The keeper stepped forward, slow and deliberate. His shadow stretched impossibly long across the stones. "The Abbey remembers all who enter," he murmured. "The walls have voices, but they are not for you to hear." Daniel tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat. For the first time, he noticed something clutched in the keeper's hand, a small iron key, old and blackened, glinting in the lantern light. The keeper's voice lowered, almost a whisper. "If you value your life, Harrington, you will forget what you have seen. Leave this place, before the Abbey decides otherwise." And as he spoke, the candle flames shuddered, as though an unseen breath had passed through the chapel. Daniel stood frozen, the chill of the chapel seeping into his bones. The keeper's words hung heavy in the air, mingling with the wavering smoke of the candles. For a moment, Daniel considered retreating to his chamber, locking the door, and forgetting the strange chant. But curiosity gnawed at him more fiercely than fear. "The Abbey cannot decide," Daniel said, his voice steadier than he felt. "It is stone, nothing more. Whatever lies here is man-made, and I intend to understand it." The keeper's eyes narrowed. He took another step closer, his boots silent upon the stone floor. The iron key glinted once more in his hand. "You are young," he said slowly. "Too young to understand that not all walls are empty. Some remember. Some obey." He raised the key slightly, as though testing its weight, then tucked it into the folds of his robe. "If you value your work, stay within the library. Catalogue your manuscripts. Leave the rest in silence." Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but the keeper turned sharply, his cloak brushing the floor. Without another word, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving only the echo of his footsteps. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. Daniel forced himself to breathe. He lowered his lantern towards the carved symbols on the floor. Though the markings were old, he noticed fresh scratches at their edges, as though someone had recently traced them with a sharp blade. His pulse quickened. Someone had been here, not centuries ago, but days, perhaps even hours. He scribbled notes hastily into his journal before slipping back through the chapel door. The iron gate groaned as he pushed it shut, though he dared not lock it again. Every step up the spiral staircase felt longer than the last, as though the Abbey itself resisted his departure. When he finally reached the upper corridor, he found a folded scrap of parchment lying upon the floor just outside his chamber. No seal, no name. Only 3 words scrawled in a trembling hand. "Do not trust." The scrap of parchment weighed on Daniel's thoughts as the hours passed. Who had left it, and why had they chosen him? The keeper's warning still echoed in his mind, yet the message outside his chamber suggested another presence within the Abbey, someone unseen, someone who wanted him cautious. Determined to press on, Daniel returned to the main library the following morning. He set aside the brittle manuscripts already catalogued and examined the shelves more closely. Behind a row of worm-eaten tomes, his fingers struck against something unexpected, stone, cold and uneven. He pushed the books aside, revealing a narrow seam in the wall. At first it looked like a simple crack, but as he ran his lantern along its edge, he saw hinges half swallowed by mortar. It was a door. Heart hammering, Daniel braced his shoulder against the wall and forced it open. The stone gave way with a rasp, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Dust billowed out, choking and dry, yet within the gloom he saw more shelves stacked with manuscripts, far older than those in the main library. Their bindings were heavy, their covers marked with symbols similar to those carved into the chapel floor. Daniel stepped inside, his lantern trembling in his hand. The chamber smelled of age and iron, and the silence was so complete it seemed to press against his ears. He pulled one manuscript free, its leather cover cracked, the Latin inside faded but legible. As he read, his stomach tightened. The text described a ritual, a binding of voices to stone, performed by the monks of Blackthorn centuries ago. They believed the Abbey could be made to remember, to guard secrets in exchange for blood. Daniel snapped the book shut, his breath shallow. The meaning of the chants, the symbols, the keeper's strange warning, everything began to knot together in his mind. And then he heard it. Not chanting this time, but a faint scratching sound, just behind the shelves. As if someone, or something, was moving within the walls themselves. Daniel froze, his lantern raised towards the shelves. The scratching came again, sharper this time, like nails dragging across stone. He pressed closer, the flame quivering with each shallow breath. "Is someone there?" he whispered, though he already knew no reply would come. The sound stopped. Silence pressed down, heavy and suffocating. Then, just as he began to believe he had imagined it, a faint murmur seeped through the wall, words too soft to catch, like fragments of prayer whispered by unseen lips. Daniel stumbled back, clutching the manuscript tight to his chest. The Abbey was alive with voices, just as the keeper had said. Yet now he knew they were not echoes of the past, they were present, breathing, listening. He forced himself to leave the hidden chamber, closing the stone door with trembling hands. Back in the main library, the air felt no safer. The rows of decaying books seemed to lean towards him, as though eager to share secrets. The parchment message returned to his mind, "Do not trust." Who had left it? The keeper. Impossible, his words had been nothing but warnings to stay away. Someone else was moving within the Abbey, someone who wanted him wary. That evening, as the sun bled red across the moors, Daniel lit the candle in his chamber and began to copy passages from the manuscript into his journal. The ritual of binding voices fascinated and terrified him in equal measure. But before long, he noticed something strange. His candle flickered, not from wind, for the window was shut, but in rhythm, almost like breathing. He leaned closer, and then he heard it. A voice, faint and desperate, whispering through the very stones of his chamber. "Harrington, leave." The flame guttered low, and a shadow passed across the wall, though no one stood there. Sleep was impossible. Daniel lay awake, the whispered warning repeating in his mind until the first pale light of dawn crept across the moors. He rose wearily, his journal clutched in his hand, determined to confront the keeper. He found him in the cloister, a long stone corridor open to the biting wind. The keeper stood motionless, his lantern extinguished, as if he had been waiting. "You heard them, didn't you?" the keeper said without turning. His voice was heavy with something between sorrow and resignation. Daniel's throat tightened. "Voices, in the walls. Someone told me to leave." The keeper finally faced him. His eyes were rimmed with darkness, but there was no surprise in them. "They know your name now," he said. "That is dangerous. Once the Abbey remembers you, it will not forget." Daniel tried to steady his voice. You carry a key. It opens the chapel, doesn't it? And more than that, it unlocks whatever lies beneath. The keeper's hand moved to the fold of his robe where the iron key rested. For a moment, Daniel thought he might deny it, but instead the keeper stepped closer, lowering his voice. The key is not mine. It belongs to the Abbey. I am only its servant. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Why keep me here at all, if it is so dangerous? The keeper studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, because sometimes the Abbey chooses. And this time, it chose you. Before Daniel could answer, a sound rippled through the air, a deep, resonant toll, as if a bell long buried had been struck. The stones beneath their feet shivered. The Abbey was waking. The tolling grew louder, echoing through every arch and corridor. Dust drifted from the vaulted ceiling as if the Abbey itself exhaled. Daniel felt his pulse hammer in his throat, yet something urged him forward. The keeper lifted the great iron key, its teeth glinting in the grey light. With a slow motion, he pressed it into the chapel door. The lock turned with a groan that seemed almost alive. Inside, the chapel was drowned in shadow. Candles guttered on their own, though no hand had touched them. At the far end, the altar lay cracked, and from the fissures seeped a dim, pulsating glow. Daniel stepped closer, his shoes scraping the stone. The glow throbbed, as though the Abbey itself had a heartbeat. He opened his journal with trembling hands, tracing the Latin words he had copied from the scrolls. They spoke of a vow, a binding, and a sacrifice. The keeper's voice broke the silence. Centuries ago, the brothers tried to contain what they had called forth. Their prayers chained it to the Abbey. But chains weaken, and oaths fade. The glow brightened, spilling across the floor like blood. The stones trembled harder. Daniel stumbled but caught himself, staring in horror as shadows twisted along the walls, taking on shapes of figures long dead. They are waking, the keeper whispered. And now, so must you. Daniel turned, but the keeper's eyes were no longer his own. They shone with the same dim light as the altar. His hand, still clutching the key, reached out. And as the great bell tolled once more, the doors slammed shut behind Daniel. The Abbey had chosen,